What is loss and damage, and why demand to include it in COP27 agenda grows? Over the last year or so, the world has witnessed extreme weather events due to climate change. The least developed, developing, and other vulnerable countries have suffered serious loss and damage compared to the industrialized countries because of the disproportionate impacts of climate change. Recently, catastrophic floods have led to the displacement of around 33 million people in Pakistan. Drought and impending famine in some parts of Africa have threatened the livelihood of 50 million people. Record-breaking heat waves and drought in parts of China and Europe have grabbed international headlines. This has, once again, brought the focus back on the topic of loss and damage, and there is a growing demand across the world at present that loss and damage should be included in the formal agenda of COP27, the upcoming UN Climate Summit in November. So, what is loss and damage? Loss and damage refers to the impacts of climate change felt when people cannot adapt to climate change any further or a limit has been reached. It signifies both permanent or repairable damage caused by various manifestations of climate change and can mean both economic and non-economic harm. It is used in UN climate negotiations to refer to the consequences of human-induced climate change. The demand to include loss and damage in COP27 agenda. Over 400 organizations from all over the world recently signed a letter demanding that loss and damage finance be included on the formal agenda for COP27. The incoming COP27 presidency convened an informal heads of delegations meeting of governments and negotiating groups for an informal consultation on loss and damage in Cairo, Egypt on the 10th of September 2022. At the UN General Assembly in September 22, the Alliance of Small Island States countries among the most vulnerable to sea level rise and other climate impacts called for concrete progress towards a funding mechanism. After visiting Pakistan in the wake of devastating floods, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged governments to address loss and damage at COP27 with the seriousness it deserves. A Climate Action Network press release stated that the issue of loss and damage has consistently been blocked or reduced to mere dialogues or side events, with rich polluter countries like the EU, the USA, Norway, and others consistently refusing to discuss details on finance. The demand for loss and damage finance actually originates in the concept of historical emission and polluter pays principle. It has been argued that the developed countries, which were mainly responsible for GHG emissions in the recent past, have a historic and moral responsibility to pay not just for remedial measures, but also for compensating for the damage caused by their actions to the environment. Loss and damage in the UN. Vulnerable nations have been requesting developed countries to provide financial assistance since the formation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in the early 90s. However, the topic of loss and damage received proper highlight during the COP19 conference in Warsaw, Poland. Next, under the Paris Agreement, Article 8, some new elements and dimensions of loss and damage were added, which reaffirmed the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage as the main vehicle under the UNFCCC process to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. At the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow last year, a 3-year task force was set up to finally discuss a funding arrangement. The momentum to some degree continued at the Bonn UN climate negotiations in Germany in June 2022, but the view on having a separate financing facility demanded by least developed countries and other groups of vulnerable countries was opposed by the developed countries like the US, Australia, and the European Union. The COP27 summit in November 2022 is crucial given the fact that it will provide a chance to finally establish a mechanism to address the growing loss and damage finance demand. India and loss and damage. India intervened strongly multiple times during the Bonn UN climate negotiations to emphasize loss and damage and the finances needed to mitigate the impacts of global warming. This intervention by India comes at a time when the country is recently facing extreme weather events like prolonged and severe heat waves and drought across many regions. India witnessed two of the world's 10 most financially devastating climate events in 2021, and both caused financial losses worth more than $1 billion apart from the loss of lives and livelihoods.